Hi, I'm Brian with Pioneer Builders. Today, we're going to talk about hot water tanks, failures, and replacements. Let's get into it. Let's start with a high-level view of what took place. So this is summertime, and we have had more condensation issues than we've ever had since I've lived here. I'm 42 years old, lived in the Pacific Northwest my whole life. So what ended up happening was on the floor, next to the water heater, there was water that had collected. You might be able to see the faint outline on the concrete. And of course, what do you typically end up thinking is that it's coming from the hot water tank. So as we zoom in and kind of come around, you'll be able to see on this stand what looks like corrosion. Another interesting thing, we'll go through the piping, but there was actually condensation draining on the outside. So it seemed like it was a tank failure. Let's look closer at these details. So first, this is the T&P, or temperature and pressure relief valve. If you listen, and you can see that maybe bouncing around a little bit. This is if there was a failure at the tank itself, it's really a safety valve. Okay, so from the outside, what we have is the temperature and pressure relief valve and the condensation drain. So go ahead, Elizabeth, turn that on. As she turns it on, you'll see more water coming out. We just tested it a moment ago. This is the condensation drain. We'll go back in and take a look at that. But when I was trying to figure this out, there was water coming out of this. In the summertime, even though it seems like it's drier outside, there's more water vapor in the air. We're climate zone 4C. We're right off the ocean. We live on a lake. So there's just more latent heat in the air, which is a fancier way of saying water vapor or humidity. We're back inside, and really what we're doing is we're just trying to take a logical approach to finding out where the problem is. So it seemed like the condensation drain was working. And again, this is where the water was at. And as we come in closer, and it's hard to see what's going on when there's water there. But what was interesting is this would dry up. And as we come around, you'll see in here some rust. So you're thinking, it's right at the tank. What's going on here? If it was the tank leaking, shouldn't it be leaking all the time? Or is it only leaking when there's some usage going on inside the house? It just wasn't making a whole lot of sense. It wasn't easy to see, especially because of the condensation. Let's take just a second and talk a little bit about how that actually works. There's a compressor up in this portion of the water heater. What it's basically doing is transferring heat from the ambient air into this water tank. So there's a coil down in there, it releases that. And when you look in here, you'll see where the fan is. Air gets drawn in from up above, and then it gets basically pushed out here. That there will end up getting cold enough that it actually causes the water vapor in the air to lose its heat energy. Basically, it condenses. We've seen it a million times. If you have a glass and you put ice in it and then water and leave it out in the summertime, what happens on the outside? That water vapor in the air has now phase changed. It's just a maybe fancier way of saying it's condensed. Now it's become liquid water. That liquid water, as it gets more and more, will eventually drain and leak. So what was actually happening as we come around, this is that CPVC condensation pipe. I started taking off this cover. This was a little loose. This piece here, even though it looked like it was in, that condensation drain pan has a little outlet on it. It shattered somehow. You'll see that there's still the threads on the inside, but on the upper side there wasn't. So what ended up happening was, summertime, way more condensation than normal. That drain pan was collecting the water like it should be. Some of the water was coming out of the condensation drain, but not all of it. And so when this was really running, and I don't know that I'll be able to get it to work. I'm going to change it over to efficiency mode. That's putting the heat pump water heater totally in heat pump. There it goes. Now the fan is kicking on. especially later in the day when it becomes more humid in the air because there's just more heat, this would now be condensing even more water. So some of it was going outside, but it was actually coming into here because it wasn't having all of it captured by the pipe. I found it by really trying to trace, and unfortunately for us, we can't really see the dribble. There was a very faint amount of water on the tank itself. And so it seemed localized here. As I was doing the work, eventually I was like, you know what? I just need to check this. And I was able to pull it out. So you can see it's not threaded or connected at all. So now we knew what the problem was. Let's take a closer look at some of those details. Craig just took off. He took a look at these seismic straps. These are gonna have to be unscrewed. So we're seismic design category D2. Again, this just illustrates how many different components come into design and construction. So yes, we're dealing with plumbing. Now we have to think about electricity and we have to think about structure. So he's got to unstrap these in order to actually remove it from the wall. That's what he'll be doing right now. Now, what I've done before when it comes to water heaters is just let gravity drain them, which takes a lot longer. Now you can see a professional company instead of me. This is flowing better than it had been. Basically what happened was there was too much sediment from the bottom of the water heater. And so what he ended up having to do was clean that out. He kind of forced it through by opening the valve at the house to get that sediment pushed through. And now we're getting really good flow. The stakes are high with plumbing. It's not just a matter of whether or not you can get cold water to a place, hot water to a tap. There's sanitation involved. In fact, the first building codes, as I understand it, revolved around sanitation. In the late 19th century, they started figuring out germ theory, and when you would just have open sewage running on the streets, breeding ground for germs and things like that. So while you may technically be able to do some of the plumbing yourself if you're an owner, you want to make sure either you know what you're doing or just hire it out. They have to think in terms of your sanitary waste and the scouring of the pipes, making sure things are pitched correctly. Ultimately, it comes back to health and hygiene. So a lot of what you see on building science and things has to do with energy efficiency. Fundamentally, if we're a builder, we have to know how to keep people safe and keep them from getting sick. So when it comes to plumbing, there's things that I know about, but by no means am I an expert. I leave that up to the experts. I want to know what they're doing. Number one, I find it super interesting. And then when there's problems like we've just seen, I can sleuth it out, but I'm not going to be the guy to replace a water heater. That's for these guys, and hopefully I can be a good help in making their job easier when it comes time to actually perform the work. This is the tank before it's been installed. So you can see this here. I'm going to be curious to see if they actually use this. I just don't know when they connect to the condensation. So I'm unscrewing it. Here you can see the male threading and you can see the female. This is the part here that's just totally gone. This feels more metal. And when I felt the other one, it felt more like plastic. So it would be interesting to see what the difference is. And maybe, again, this could have been a known issue. I'm not sure what this is up here. They're gonna actually let me keep this water heater. They were planning on taking it. So sometime in the future, we're probably gonna take that thing apart. But you can take a look inside here. And then here's an interesting comment. Hand tighten only. Residual condensation may be present and drain upon removal of cap. There is some condensation there. That's that moisture. But interesting that they do not want tools involved in this. So I'm going to put this back on, and then on the bottom side here, this outlet's a little bit different. You can see these barbs that go the opposite direction, so you can actually add a hose to that, and that will seal it up. Here's the FLIR camera, and it's showing the infrared heat. So that's the hose, and now you get an idea of what's going on with all of that hot water. These guys are just wrapping up. You can see in the background they're putting their connections back together. So cool to get to watch these guys. They really don't demo, they deconstruct, and then they reconstruct. They put it all back together. They're actually improving it. They're using, I think it's PEX Type A. Originally it was PEX Type B, so they're using the expansion fittings. I don't know if it's Uponor that they're using, but in any case, this is actually an upgrade. These guys are pros, super happy with how good they've done this. I got back from Switzerland about 3 weeks ago, and that's when the problem originally happened. I didn't hear about it until after I saw the problem, and then it was, oh yeah, that happened while you were gone. So it's only been about 3 weeks from the failure all the way up to this point. It's been pretty painless. He's going to get all these connections put back together. I think he'll open up his valves, fill up the water tank with water, then he'll flip the breaker in order for the compressor and the electrical side to start working again. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this content, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Build Show.